This presentation describes the Land and Water Board's approach to engagement and consultation in the Mackenzie Valley. The Mackenzie Valley of the Northwest Territories is home to an integrated and coordinated system of land and water co-management resulting from land claim agreements and provided for by the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, or MVRMA. Under the authority of the MVRMA, the Land and Water Boards regulate the use of land and water and the deposit of waste through the issuance and management of land use permits and water licenses. There are 4 land and water boards in the Mackenzie Valley that perform these functions, each in different management areas: the Gwich'in, Sahtu, Wakaji, and Mackenzie Valley Land and Water Boards. The objective of the Land and Water Boards is to provide for the conservation, development, and utilization of land and water resources in a manner that will provide the optimum benefit generally for all Canadians, and in particular for residents of the Mackenzie Valley. In exercising their authorities, the Land and Water Boards must consider the importance of conservation to the well-being and way of life of the Indigenous peoples of Canada, to whom Section 35 of the Constitution Act applies, and who use an area of the Mackenzie Valley. They must also consider any traditional knowledge and scientific information that is made available. In their role, the Land and Water Boards must ensure that the concerns of Indigenous people and the general public have been taken into account. To meet these objectives, the Land and Water Boards have implemented an engagement and consultation policy. This policy reflects the coordinated resource management system established by the MVRMA and ensures that the Land and Water Board's responsibilities for meaningful consultation with all affected parties, including Indigenous peoples in the Mackenzie Valley, are clearly articulated and met. The policy, which was first implemented in 2013 and since updated, is supported by the associated engagement guidelines for applicants and holders of water licenses and land use permits. These guidelines include specific requirements and suggested best practices for early engagement and engagement planning with affected parties for the life of the project. The guidelines are currently undergoing a process to be updated. Before issuing a water license or land use permit, a board must ensure that the potential impacts of proposed uses of land and water are evaluated and appropriate mitigation measures are in place when required. The Land and Water Boards work with applicants, affected parties, Indigenous governments, the governments of Canada and the NWT, and other parties to ensure that the potential impacts of proposed projects are understood and carefully considered before decisions are made. Coordinated processes are essential to achieving meaningful involvement of affected parties, given the collaborative system of land and water management in the Mackenzie Valley and the roles that all parties play in it, as well as the goal of furthering reconciliation. In addition to defining each entity's responsibility, the policy describes the importance of interagency cooperation, information sharing, transparency, and accountability between the various organizations. Important responsibilities which often intersect include the role of the applicant to carry out engagement with potentially affected parties, the role of the board to carry out statutory consultation under the MVRMA, and the role of the Crown to ensure that if the duty to consult has been triggered, adequate Crown consultation and accommodation has taken place. In the Mackenzie Valley, the Government of Canada and the Government of the Northwest Territories have indicated that they rely on the Land and Water Board's processes to contribute to fulfilling their duties. Therefore, the Land and Water Boards may need to assess and rule on the adequacy of Crown consultation in the case where the Land and Water Board is the final decision maker. The Land and Water Board engagement and consultation policy therefore describes the submission requirements for applicants, permittees, and licensees pertaining to early and ongoing engagement with affected parties and Land and Water Board consultation procedures during regulatory proceedings and how they will rule on the adequacy of Crown consultation. The policy includes requirements for applicants to do early engagement and to detail the engagement in an engagement record. The first part of the record is an engagement summary, which is a results-based report of engagement with each affected party. It is important that this summary details the outcomes of engagement and documents any unresolved concerns. Secondly, the engagement log is a detailed account of all engagement occurrences. The resulting engagement record must be comprehensive and provide the Land and Water Board with evidence of the engagement activities that took place well in advance of an application, a summary of key concerns, resulting changes to the proposed project based on what was heard, and which concerns remain unresolved. The engagement record must demonstrate that early engagement was done in good faith and that all reasonable measures have been taken to consider and reflect the views of the affected parties in the application or submission. The policy also requires that applicants plan out engagement over the life of the project. This planning is intended to be in collaboration with each affected party. The engagement plan is a forward-looking document that details timing and approaches to engagement with each affected party throughout the life of the project. It should reflect the scope, scale, and context of the project. Projects with more potential for impacts will typically require more engagement than other less impactful ones. Elements of the engagement plan may need to be specific for each affected party. Applicants and affected parties should discuss and come to mutual agreement upon the planned goals, methods, frequency, and process for engagement throughout the life of the project. Engagement and consultation occurs before and throughout the regulatory process, from early engagement during the ideas and planning stages to the consultation that happens during the Land and Water Board's public review of the application and preliminary screening, a potential environmental assessment step, in permitting and licensing, and then during the life of the project. Applicant engagement needs to be in the early stages of project planning and well in advance of the application. Engaging early and collaboratively has the beneficial result of more positive and reciprocal relationships. The Land and Water Boards have statutory consultation obligations under the MVRMA. Procedural elements such as public reviews and public hearings form part of the Land and Water Board's consultation approach. The boards rely on their policies, guidelines, and rules of procedure to carry out their proceedings, and all of these resources may be found on the Land and Water Board's websites. The Land and Water Boards will provide opportunities for meaningful consultation throughout their proceedings and will work with individual parties and communities to ensure that the proceedings are accessible and meet individuals' needs. The Land and Water Board's responsibility to consult is separate from the Crown's constitutional duty to consult. In the case that the Land and Water Boards act as a final decision maker, the Board may need to, if necessary, assess the adequacy of consultation by the Crown before making a final decision, taking into account information gathered during the proceeding. Where the Land and Water Board is a final decision maker, it cannot approve a license or permit if it is not satisfied that the Crown's duty to consult and accommodate has been met. In cases where there are questions about the adequacy of Crown consultation, or any other issue that arises during the course of a Land and Water Board proceeding, the Board will refer to its rules of procedure. For example, if significant unresolved concerns about adequacy of consultation are raised and not resolved, the Land and Water Board may need to address these concerns, both procedurally and by securing additional evidence before it can complete a proceeding. The Land and Water Board Engagement Guidelines includes details regarding engagement submission requirements, recommended engagement best practices, guidance for identifying affected parties, initiation of dialogue and engagement planning, recommended engagement activities, and templates and guides for engagement documentation and planning. The guidelines provide suggestions on the minimum expected levels of engagement and engagement planning based on the type and circumstances of a proposed project. Together, the Land and Water Board's engagement and consultation policy and guidelines are intended to assist all parties in fulfilling their roles in the collaborative system of land and water management in the Mackenzie Valley, as well as to further reconciliation. If you have any questions or comments about this material, please visit the Land and Water Board's websites or contact board staff. Merci.